His sometimes truculent awareness stimulated regional consciousness and the production and consumption of regional writing, both anticipating and later helping to rationalize the non-inclusion of six northern counties in the new Irish Free State in 1922. The new arrangement was formally expressed in the establishment of a separate regional parliament and administration in Belfast, still within the United Kingdom, which was eventually re-described as the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Ki böyle geçiyor arkadaşlar isim artık. Ulster Regionalism, the process of reaction to emergent Catholic nationalism and the literary revival and the literary exploration of other identities and concerns in Ulster characteristically involved Protestant clergymen and their relations and their congregations. As an alternative to embracing the newly and aggressively articulated Irish Ireland, dikkat edin, Irish Ireland, İrlandalıların İrlandası diyelim. The sense of special connection with Presbyterian Scotland or North Britain as motherland for Irish Presbyterians was often emphasized. Moreover, the traditions of rural life in much of the region were English-speaking rather than Irish-speaking. Burada ilginç. So for local writers, the idiom and atmosphere of Lady Gregory's Kilterton in the Irish-speaking Far West were usually less appropriate than English or Scottish literary models. Daughter and wife of English Unitarian ministers, Elizabeth Gaskell had developed social sympathies and a sense of specific communities in her novels and stories as a consequence of her own and her husband's pastoral experience, and similar claims could be made for several Ulster writers. Agnes Romilly White, for example, was the daughter of a Church of Ireland rector who ministered in Dundonald, just outside Belfast, from 1890 to 1912. Vivid recollections of the Dundonald's years and sensitive pastoral awareness of poverty and bereavement, as well as of the human comedy, lie behind her novels on village life near the city. Eser isimleri filan verilmiş. Diğer taraftan J.M. Barries var, onun da şeyleri var, eserleri verilmiş. Evet, J.M. Barrie had provided a model for sketches of Ulster Presbyterian life, such as Archibald MacBroy's bir eser adı var. Based on his native Gallagher, gene bir eser adı geliyor. Buralarda eser adları geliyor. The Tyrone minister W.F. Marshall was more ambitious in his historical novel Planted by a River. Set in rural Tyrone in early 18th century, a peaceful era, but within living memory of the siege of Derry in 1689. It responds to the nationalist and nativist legend of dispossession and oppression on the land by presenting psalm singing Presbyterian settlers or planters as patiently improving previously uncultivated land. The protagonist's grandfather had come as a stranger from Ayrshire into that part of Ireland, dominated by the rampart of the spurring mountains and hills, glowing with wind blossom. But now, 2 generations later, there is an acquired sense of belonging to this unchanging landscape. This was my country, he says. The title recalls the first psalm, Scottish metrical version diye şiiri veriyor, oraya da okursunuz. The Ulster novelist Forrest Reid, great-nephew of the Presbyterian historian James Seaton Reid, born into the business world of Belfast, reacted against his characteristic northern Protestant background, but not to the extent of espousing Celtic revivalism. He owed much more to the writing of friends in England, such as Walter de la Mare, and to 19th century French literature than to feminism of young Ireland. His own distinctive cult of youth and romantic reverie in novels such as eser adları vermiş, went with a long cultivated aestheticism, which issued in a superb, very English essay in Victorian art appreciation. Illustrators of the 60s and a volume of prose translation from the Greek anthology eventually published in 1943. The neo-paganism of this collection and of his outlook more generally invites comparison not with Yeats but with the Edwardian cult of Pan, illustrated in The Story of Panic, an early short story by his friend E.M. Forster. The Ulster dramatist and novelist St. John Erwin, a realist where Reid was more of a fantasist, stayed closer to his northern roots. Born in Belfast but early exposed to the London-based plebeian socialism of Wells and Shaw, from which he always claimed he had derived his higher education, he wrote for Dublin's Abbey Theatre. Bu da çok önemli ve çok işlevsel olan bir tiyatro. Successful, specifically Ulster plays such as Mixed Marriage and John Ferguson. A cantankerous Ulster Unionist in later life, he started out as a moderate nationalist convinced that the business-like ethos of urban Ulster could contribute significantly to an independent Ireland. But he was ambivalent about his native place. His novel, Mrs. Martin's Man, originally written as another Ulster play for the Abbey, but rejected by Yeats, draws on childhood memories of his redoubtable shopkeeper grandmother and the austere self-reliant industry characteristic of lower middle-class life in strongly Protestant East Belfast and North Down. Disciplined by the residual dramatic structure, the evocation is precise but unsentimental. Mrs. Martin's absentee husband is sullen and irresponsible, but he is shown to have had reasons for wanting to escape. The peace and frugal comfort of home and his wife's calm and stoical resilience have to be balanced against the stifling respectability, sanctimonious humbling, and bigotry of the locality. The same congenial, but often also narrow and self-important, world is invoked in some of his later novels, such as The Foolish Lovers and The Wayward Man. Both of these use flawed quasi-autobiographical personae to explore the Wellesian theme of half-foolish longing to escape from the limitations of provincialism, shops and shopkeepers, tempered by loneliness and the attractiveness of the familiar. Irving's refusal in his fiction, if not always in his plays or his journalism, to idealize ordinary and often difficult lives in obscure places, or to relapse into sentimental regional ideals, and his tendency to present real places under transparent pseudonyms. Burada isimler filan verilmiş. Onlara da bakarsınız arkadaşlar. Alt satıra geçiyorum. There were other connections between English and Ulster regionalism and regionalists. To take an early example, Shem Balloch wrote austere narratives of Coevernaghan country life, unassociated by any obviously benign providence, which revisit several of Hardy's recurrent themes from an Ulster perspective. Urbanization and the late 19th century agricultural depression in England had adversely affected country life, burada önemli, as depicted in Hardy's regional novels, hatırlayın Wessex novels, and this had its counterpart in the perennial problem of Irish land, felt all the more acutely at the end of the 19th century because of the perceived inadequacy of successive reforms, beginning with Gladstone's Land Act of 1870. Rural Ulster, with a better history of landlord and tenant relations than elsewhere in Ireland, had maintained a modest prosperity, but this didn't extend across the whole province. Fernigan in the far west had been particularly badly affected by the famine, hatırlayın korkunç bir kıtlık oluşuyor, and its aftermath, and the decline of traditional industries and the lure of industrial Belfast and the emigrant ship precipitated severe rural depopulation. Bullock's father was steward to the Earl of Erney and later a tenant farmer at Kilmore, on the southern shore of Lough Erne, so he was fully aware of the problems from childhood. The increasingly unsatisfactory economics of life on the poorish land around Lough Erne, despite the magnificence of lake and mountain scenery, gave rise to unsentimental narratives such as recounting the difficult courtship of the inarticulate wee James Trotter, a small hill farmer, then the dollar, in which the money from America that had changed everything does not last, and the Lowsiders. In this last novel, the central character Richard Jepp is a coldly calculating middle-aged farmer who craftily secures a farm by marrying a widow, but he is a realist rather than a rascal and is treated with some sympathy. He speaks for the cramped lives of all his neighbors when he says to an old friend, with characteristically understated mildness, "Don't ye ever feel, Mary, that God could be a trifle more generous to ye without much of struggle?